and make it work for the web, which is kind of what I'd like to see for the future of WebVR. No, yeah. This is exactly the kind of thing that lands in the declarative WebVR community group, but I think it's kind of a thing where it's going to be difficult to standardize because we'd have to work with the CSS working group and the web platform HTML people. Yes. Yeah. So I hate that API. I am. Yeah, I don't like that it's a JavaScript API. I think it's definitely the kind of thing that could be a meta tag on the page. I also don't like that it's vendor prefixed as well, which is pretty terrible. There is an API which we do have, which I do really like, which is we've extended the video attribute. So if you do type 360, we can automatically handle. So if you press full screen on a 360 video in Samsung Internet, and the developer said, yeah, type equals 360 video, then it goes immersive when you go full screen, and that's the kind of thing I'd like to see.
My question is like if you can prefix images too, like giving them a source set for 360, and then you're having like instead of like scaling the image based on browser width, then if you don't have a browser width because you are an immersive space, then you have like a cube map or a equirect as default fallback for a VR experience.
I love it. That's really cool. Yes, having the picture element be able to handle immersive media would be super cool, and I love it. That's the kind of thing I'd love to see happen in the future of WebVR. Yes.
And another question on that same note is like maybe we'll have also a chance to see if there's like an add 2x, add 3x based on the performance on the device, because if I am actually in a developing country and I don't have the full-blown 4G, 5G internet connection, I might want to have the equirect that is a lower resolution than when I'm in a home setup with an HTC Vive and I can get the 4, 8K, whatever resolution.
And as a further to that, as well as network performance, so downloading, be like, oh, I'm on a slow connection, I'm going to download smaller models, smaller textures. You could also do stuff like, if you're on a low-powered, say you're on a low-end smartphone, show a model with very simple rendering, and then if you're, oh, I'm on a high-end desktop computer, be like, I can do PBR and dynamic shadows in this model, and like progressively enhance performance, which, if you've come from the games industry, you might think, oh no, that's terrible because I'm not going to be able to know what my model's going to look like on a particular device. But for people who just want to be like, I painted something in Tilt Brush, take a look. It's the perfect thing because it looks as best as it can be on the available hardware. So yeah, progressive enhancement and is something that you'll be able to provide very well. Thanks,
I'm going to get really hand-wavy here for a second and just imagine a future that totally doesn't exist yet. But if there were a sort of declarative WebVR, you could imagine that some of the stuff that we're shipping today in 3GS, like essentially we have to ship like a game engine with every single experience, right? And we ship the same game engine essentially every time. If some of that stuff moved into the platform, we had declarative features for things like models that automatically had magic window, that sort of thing. You could imagine, like, what if then the competition between browsers shifted toward like who can implement the best lighting model that works the quickest, right? Or the best magic window, or the right. I think there's a really nice sort of positive, I guess, browser frenemies thing where like everybody might vie to offer like the best platform features to content authors. So again, very handwave, but it seems like it might be an interesting place for things to go.
This is the kind of stuff I love about like progressive web apps at the moment, where all the browsers are competing for what's the best experience we can give users, and it'd be great to see the same for VR as well.
A small comment on the declarative CSS. We're coming from games actually, and we did some experiments with our technology, which we'll show tomorrow, which is basically a website with declarative CSS, and we tried it on users, and they were extremely interested because we tried it with a sports website, and you can really do more stuff. So it's not only something about immersion, it's more about productivity. And even when I work on different tabs, let's say, and having the ability to compose them and do more stuff simultaneously is extremely powerful, not only for, let's say, powerful VR users, but for the average user as well, I believe. So I truly believe this is the future of where we should go. So less OpenGL, more HTML.
One nice thing about the declarative approach like this is, well, the way things are at the moment is that we have this, we have the setup right now where we can build anything our imagination can build as long as it's in WebGL. So I think if we were to get started, just implementing a few features, and then as time goes on, we can start. So right now, like the way I've described declarative WebVR probably wouldn't be super good for a social VR site because it'll be very difficult to get in avatars. But if in like a later version of the declarative WebVR standards, whatever they ended up being, it had support for avatars or for like IK rigs, so you can get yourself represented and mean a consistent character model between VR sessions across domains. Then like I think there's a lot of room for progress and development step by steps.
Yeah. And just to add on that, it could solve somewhat of the content problem that currently VR has, because you have a billion websites, and I don't expect a lot of them to go and rewrite in WebGL.
Yeah.
But they still want to give a better user experience.
Yeah, progressive enhancement is what the web's built on, and if we force every website to be rebuilt in WebGL, all we're going to do is fork the web, and no one wants to do that.
So on that topic, I noticed when I was at OC4, I was kind of watching how Oculus is solving these things, and they're an interesting sort of, I guess, alternative case, because they're building a lot of their platform, their first-party apps on the web stack in a way through React VR, but they're actually compiling it to native. And basically that means that they sort of aren't too worried about building on the web platform or standardizing things. They're just sort of like moving fast and breaking things, and it's all internal and it's all proprietary. But you can sort of look and see some patterns emerging in their space and in our very different space. One of the things I thought was quite interesting is a lot of their apps boil down to some form of skybox plus some form of 2D sort of panel in space. Usually one panel or maybe three, like one with two wings, and then GLTF models placed within the scene, which is kind of actually pretty simple, like three building blocks. But when you sit down and think about it, there's a lot of content that could be created with those 3 building blocks. You could do museum tours, or you could, build like a shoe store, or any number of things through those very simple building blocks. I noticed handful of A-frame experiences are similar as well, and then you sort of see similar patterns falling out in products like Visor. So it feels like there's maybe some convergent evolution happening here.
I have another question for Google VR, Chrome VR. And there's this Google VR services that actually, like, where you can scan in your QR code, and then you get your headset, like the lens distortion that is stored on the web. So if I'm a headset maker and like Merge VR or the other alternative headset makers next to Daydream and Oculus, and then Samsung Gear VR. So if I, like, all this information about lens distortion, interpupillar distance, if I have input clicks or touch or 2 clicks, or all this stuff is basically kind of stored nicely in this Google Web Services, Google VR Services API. However, it is only available for Android, as far as I understand. And I mean, it's hard for me to create Apple like experiences, like iOS experiences, because I don't know this information, and I'm basically defaulting on the default of whatever 3GS or WebVR gives me. And now every experience has 80 degrees field of vision, or 90, whatever the cardboard headset is, the cardboard original. So I was wondering if there's a way where we can actually kind of open that as a JSON feed or something to have like this load of information about lens distortion, which actually directly impacts how I am seeing my environment, if it's distorted or not, how accurate is my environment based on like dense distortion and screen resolution and whatever I have. So is there something that is kind of open source-ish that is less within that kind of small little API that just works for Android?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm afraid I'm not qualified to answer it because I haven't worked on that problem at all. Someone like Brandon Jones might be able to answer it. I suspect, so this is just me talking because I can't really talk for Google. I don't know the problem well enough, but I would guess that there's probably an interest among the folks at Google to find a way to solve this in a standards-based way rather than building a whole ecosystem around a Google proprietary API that you can query or something like that. It's, again, I'm sort of hand-waving here, and this is my personal guess, but it seems like a problem that we need to find a way to solve at the standards level, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense that Google tries to kind of work out an ecosystem, just like Samsung does with the phone paired with their headset. So you have like this defragmentation where you have the cell phone and the performance of the cell phone and the screen resolution and the headset and the lens distortion and the input, and you want to kind of reduce the amount of variables and unknowns in this environment to get a like comfortable kind of user experience.
Yeah.
But it is kind of disenfranchising anyone that is playing outside of that space. So if I, for an example, like Merge VR, you'd have this AR cube, or any kind of, if you go on Amazon, you can see like 2,000 different headsets that use cell phones to display VR content. I can use any of those, but like it's not really, if I don't have an Android device, it's not going to be as good as it could be, and that's the problem that I have.
Do you have a so the at least back when I was like implementing something which used the WebVR API directly, this information is exposed through the WebVR API, and if you're using so we're talking about the cardboard-like headsets from Amazon and using the cardboard phones with iPhones. So the WebVR polyfill makes a call to a database, looks up the device information for screen size and real pixel information to work out stuff like field of view, and the size and the aspect ratio. So like it should be there.
Yeah. The problem is that it's actually on the browser level. So you have the Google VR services is a setup in your browser. So in Chrome VR, right, you can set up what kind of headset you're using, and then it pulls in that information that's stored in the database of Google. But it is not an exposed information set that I can actually pull from if I'm not using the browser.
So I think it should assume you're using a cardboard, and I'm not sure if the distance from the screen to the lens of the Daydream is different to the cardboard. If you're talking about using an iPhone in a Daydream headset, but that information should be exposed. If it's not, we need to make like changes to either the standard or to the polyfill. But it should be there.
I'm glad you knew the answer.
It's Dan from Samsung. I just wanted to also reinforce. I know I wasn't here this morning, so somebody might have already said this, but to me, part of the promise of the WebVR is any browser, any headset, etc. It's got to be that. That is the differentiator for WebVR. Not that, oh, we've got really great WebVR in Samsung Internet or really great WebVR in Google Chrome. It's got to work everywhere, which is kind of like, I don't know if the person from BBC is here, but we're doing a little bit of work with BBC, and one of their interests is in getting to as many people as possible, including like kids in their in their homes who may have been given a Google Cardboard or similar, as like a birthday present, for their and now how can we engage those people with the devices that they have and the browsers that they have, and that to me is the most interesting thing, the reach about WebVR, and something that really needs to be preserved in this discussion about where the future of it's going. Sorry for that rant.
Yeah, editorializing here again, but I definitely think, I agree. Reach is like the key thing that the web has that like native does not, and it's a lot of hard work has gone into making it possible to like hit as many devices as possible. Actually, Jordan would be a really good person to be part of this discussion. He's one of the maintainers on the WebVR polyfill. So there's just an enormous amount of like scary gunk code that had to be written to like be able to patch up all of the differences between these devices. So it's kind of a like everybody has this ideal of getting to this world where it's any device, any headset, and the reality is like we're having to like patch up all of the weird holes and sew up the tears and here and there, but it seems to be more or less working, continually improving, but definitely getting there. I think what's really exciting to me is now that the standards process is sort of embracing AR and mixed reality as part of the purview of what they're tackling, you can start to imagine problems being solved like progressively enhancing immersive experiences. So if I don't have a headset, or if my phone is too slow to support a headset, or if my headset is across the room and I don't want to grab it, you could experience those same things as a magic window, or maybe as an AR thing. Like I can view the same model in immersive 3D space or drop it into the room in front of me. I feel like we're getting pretty close to those types of broad reach problems.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm hogging a little bit, but I have actually I tried to develop a WebVR browser for iOS, where I actually had to. I pushed it to the iTunes store and it didn't let it through. That's the thing that Apple does, if it doesn't really do it. What I did was I used the ARKit to kind of do an inside-out tracking thing that now HoloLens and the mixed reality thing from Windows does. So we're thinking about open sourcing the code just because if I can push it through it, that's how it is. Now the thing is, like browsers like Carmel or that are really meant to be for WebVR and WebXR, and is there any plan to kind of publish those browsers in an iOS setup in iTunes? Because obviously Safari is not yet on board, and we're defaulting on the polyfill, which then gives a whole this whole problem is that we have to default on a WebVR polyfill, you know.
I'm guessing Google or Samsung might run into the exact same problem you did, which is that Apple doesn't allow other rendering engines on their platform. So, I mean, if we could ship Chrome on iOS, we probably would have been doing that a while ago. But we have to work within the limitations of whatever WebKit on iOS can do. So right now that means user space. Now that Apple's part of the this working group, hopefully we'll see some traction, some progress.
Yeah, I know a Chrome app exists on iTunes. I just wonder if it could be extended.
It's running WebKit on the back end because that's all you can do on iOS. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any? So we've been talking about some stuff that we'd like to see in the platform in the VR future. Is there anything any like must-have features you'd like to see in the platform before, like HTML and CSS could do VR for you? Like,
I did both. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you find that process taking more legacy content? How did you accomplish that?
So I've been creating components for A-Frame, which means that that's me creating content, but also I have repurposed content for clients. Like they hired me to create content for them, like basically on like one job I did was for Vonage, creating an experience for them to to visualize their business-to-business software solutions in a three-dimensional space to give them closer to the buyer, so they get an idea of what data does in a kind of three-dimensional space. That was like a job. So I feel like the problem of content creation is not really a problem. You just have to give the people the right tools, and the right like A-Frame to kind of create the content. I don't think that content never ever was a problem for VR. I think it's just that the exposure of like how to consume the content is the problem. And when I talk to a lot of people all over the place, they don't know about WebVR. They know about VR because HTC Vive and Oculus Rift did enough advertising during Christmas season last year, so they know about these products, but they don't know they can actually experience VR in their cell phones, in their pockets, and that kind of like that advertising is not out there enough. That's the problem.
yeah, hopefully we might see some advertising along this front when the 2.0 is standardized and they're no longer behind flags in browsers. We might see there might be a new Chrome advert being like, yeah, check out, you can do virtual reality in our website.
So one suggestion I had about from a mobile browser experience, since now WebVR is mobile browser dependent, I'd like to see a way how to get notifications, just like not like a notification in the application, more like as a JSON feed or something like that, so it doesn't overlap. You know, when you get notifications on websites, it comes as a pop-up. That kind of thing. I would like to have like another way to receive those or bypass those, so you can build them into a VR experience. Yeah.
No. No, you can't give a website access to the notifications which are being sent to a user. That's a privacy nightmare. Please, no, sorry.
One thing, I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about the advertising and awareness. I think I mentioned kids giving each other Google Cardboard or similar type things for birthday presents, that's because I've seen that happening, right? So there's awareness that you can do VR on your phone. What people aren't aware of is that you can do it through your web browser, right? And so like New York Times, for instance, did a whole thing with like New York Times VR, but you have to download their app, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff like that. And right now I think we have a awareness gap of, yeah, you can actually do it in your browser. And when we talk to people, even people at content companies about this, they're like, what? I didn't know you could do that. Or even now, when I was trying to get this visor thing working on Samsung Internet, whoever I was talking to said, oh yeah, use it in the app, right? Well, okay, that's not WebVR then. It's WebVR if it's in the browser. And that, I think that's something that we got to keep coming back to. Is like this is part of making VR part of the web, right?
I think if we can introduce VR to kids and as content creators, if we can be like, you can take your favorite band posters and put them up. You can go to objects and you can go to poly.google.com and fill it with all your favorite animals and giant robots and Minecraft figures and all the other stuff that children like. And you like Minecraft? Yeah. Cool. So if you can if we can get kids to put themselves, like, representations of what they like on the web, like back when, like, MySpace was back in the day, when you just covered it in your own crap and it looked terrible, but it was yours and you loved it, and all your friends were like, yeah, that's your thing, you built that. If we can get them doing that with VR as well and sharing it amongst their friends, I think like we'd be in a new renaissance of the web. Like, I think that would be incredibly cool. And I think just lowering the bar to entry as low as it will go, I think that is what we need to do.
Following on from that, I think it's about also finding the people in companies who use it. I was doing some work with councils the other week on planning, and they saw WebVR and loved it because they could see the application for it. So if it can get out to technologists, people like that who are working in different industries, and they're aware of it, it's not just they have to spend a lot of money on a headset, I think they would see a lot of value in it. But it's getting out to those sort of trade shows, talking to those sort of people, and sort of moving outside of the VR community to do that.
Hi, my name is Jerry Ellis from Dublin. Virtual reality has the danger of repeating the exclusions that are in real reality, if you like, or let's call it legacy reality. So I'm blind. So if I don't want my primary source of information as visual, I may need it as sound or as haptic or whatever else it may be. Augmentative reality and virtual reality need to accommodate that, to be able to say, well, instead of using visual as the primary, we need to have different ways of it. And maybe I need to control it using an assistive device rather than a headset or whatever. So the API needs that flexibility to be interoperable with different technologies and not to build in the same bias. The same may be true for deaf people and for various others. I'm just saying, for virtual reality to reflect reality, it needs to cover the needs of various different groups of people. There'll be a session on this after lunch. I've just given you something to think about over lunch. Thank you.
I think you're really, really right here. I think this is the kind of thing where WebVR should need to be declarative so that it can be reinterpreted for the needs of the user who's using it. That's incredibly important. And if that means using computer vision to describe a scene, or whether it means the developer describing the scene in their HTML and then having assistive technologies dictate out what's in the environment. But I'm not sure what form it needs to take, but it needs to happen, because right now WebVR is not for everyone. And if the web isn't for everyone, then it's not the web. at least it's not the web for me.
Yep. So that's correct. Sorry, I'm taking over here. This is Roland. Just I'm actually going to talk about accessibility and my tests, and I actually did build an WebVR experience for blind people and people with other disabilities, and I'm going to showcase that too. Yeah. So it's true. We can build WebVR experiences that are inclusive, and they don't have to be relying on screen readers and standard tools that actually are contrary to the immersive experience of VR, because as we know, screen readers are there to enhance or replace content, because the web is built about the idea that content consumption is basically like consuming written text or images described. And WebVR, or like in general VR, are immersive experience where you actually place in an environment, and that's a very sad thing if you replace that with just a readout, So I'm going to talk about that in the accessibility session a little longer. Yeah.
More declarative stuff would seem to be a good step forward towards making something more accessible. That's just my feeling.
Yeah.
Which means less
I agree.
WebVR, less WebGL native and more things like A-frame.
That's definitely a way to solve it. One that I'm particularly personally excited about. I've also heard some proposals floated to basically find ways to mark up WebGL or to tag things within WebGL for accessibility, which is sort of going the other direction. It's hard to tell at this stage how things will shake out. I feel like I'm sort of a declarative partisan. It'd be interesting if we had someone in the room who could speak more deeply to some of the other proposals floated. But I think, fully agree. This is a problem that needs to be solved, and it improves the web for everyone, because the reality is that virtual reality it's not just about sight, it's also about the whole experience. And I think that we're going to find that there are lots of applications that shake out of all of our exploring that might have nothing to do with sight at all for any user. We're already starting to see things like auditory experiences that are spatial, or guided tours of a space that are audio only. As our devices sort of fragment into multiple, sometimes screenless devices, you're going to probably see a lot more variety in what augmented or virtual reality means, I would suspect.
Because that is one thing about WebVR, is that right now WebVR headsets aren't that good. Sorry if you're from a hardware manufacturer. And everyone in VR needs assistive technologies. So right now we're just making all the signs really big, but it also helps having stuff like using the voice synthesis API, and in VR people are of limited motion because the controllers are shaky. It's hard to get lots of precision. It's difficult to walk around. Stuff like the speech recognition API can help with that. But I'm hoping that if these, an uptick in the usage of these technologies will get the browser manufacturers to put more effort into making them better. And I'd like to see a big improvement in them and hopefully in the not too distant future, especially with the work Mozilla's doing around voice recognition. So hopefully we'll see the web as a whole get better for people who need to use speaking and on hearing interfaces. Hopefully, I hope.
Just to add one more thing, I've actually was a part of last month. No, in October was the hackathon at MIT, a VR AR hackathon, and one of the winners was an application that used ARKit to pin drop audio files for blind people to navigate the real world. So it actually that won one of the finals. So applications for AR to basically drop sound files to give people with visual disabilities some kind of hint where they are at any time of the day. The example was that they brought this, that if you navigate at nighttime in a street and you don't know where you are, and you have a pin, a sound pin of a bar that you know is in the area, and you pass that bar and you hear the bar sounds. So it basically re-augments the real world back into like the mind of the person that doesn't see that even the bar is closed. You kind of have like an orientation point. So that was an application for WebXR AR to kind of serve people with visual disabilities.
We should be closing because even if we are 30 minutes late, the lunch is getting cold.
Please. I was just going to say, lunch is happening, so we should probably wrap up. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Yeah, I gather it's that away somewheres.
My question was actually more of a, it's for you guys actually as browser vendors, but it's a sort of maybe a newbie question. How hard is it to affect change from within the company that is developing the browser, and also like also from outside? Is it a critical mass of users issue? Is it not specified or not specific, or like not specific enough as a proposal issue? Is it a developer community, like developer lacking issue? Because for instance, one of the issues...
You look like you have some thoughts.
So this is for like, why is there no declarative WebVR yet?
It's more of a, I was actually more concerned about accessibility, because I come from the HTML, CSS side of that, so ARIA and all that, and it's sort of harrowing sometimes, like how I would want some features to be in, and not knowing what the best way to actually start the process to affect that and to influence vendors is.
I'd say probably standard, so I'll leave this to Dom, who's...
Yeah, so part of the role of W3c is to be accompanying these change requests, and there is a lot of black magic in the process, and part of it is what you identified. I mean, there needs to be developers pool for a request, there needs to be a clearly identified user need, and there needs to be browser vendors that are convinced that this fits into the roadmap. So, I mean, I can't say if you say A, B, and C, you'll get it, but part of it is to get involved into the conversation. So one way of getting involved is, I mean, for instance, if there is already similar work happening in W3c, getting involved in the GitHub repositories where we develop the spec is a good way. We have mailing lists also where you can bring inputs and questions and so on. In general, I'll be honest, it is a difficult and somewhat protracted process, so you have to come with lots of energy and motivation. But it works. I mean, so some of you may be familiar with work that happened a few years ago around responsive images, making them, making so that you can load images of different resolutions depending on the resolution of the display. And this was like the poster child example of developers asking for requests, asking and asking and asking, and finally getting it. So it did take a lot of time, a lot of frustration, I think, in the process as well. But it worked, and part of what I do in W3c beyond VR and WebRTC is also developer relationship. So if you want to get entangled in that process, I'm probably the right person to get the conversation started. I can give you hints, I can give you guidance. But in general, yes, the standardization process is difficult, but it's also a very effective way in getting this kind of change brought to the platform.
Cool, thanks. All right, let's all break and go to lunch. Woo! I thought that was quite nice.
Yeah.